Chapter 1: The First Lie. I never thought it would happen to me. I used to be the kind of woman who believed in the sanctity of marriage. I believed in love, in vows, in loyalty. And yet, there I was, sitting in my car after a long day at work, about to text someone I shouldn't have. My husband, Tom, was always busy with his high-powered job, and I found myself spending more and more time alone. I didn't mind it at first. In fact, I enjoyed the solitude. But as the months went by, I started to feel a familiar ache, a loneliness I couldn't ignore. That's when I met Jason. He wasn't like anyone I'd ever met before. Tall, dark hair, charming smile. He made me feel alive again in a way that I hadn't felt in years. Every glance from him made my heart skip a beat, and every text exchange felt like an exhilarating secret we shared. It started innocently enough, just a few messages here and there about work or random things. But it didn't take long before it turned into something more. I tried to justify it. Tom was always working late, always too distracted to pay attention to me. He didn't seem to care anymore, and I felt invisible. Jason, on the other hand, listened to me. He made me feel seen, heard, understood. First, I thought it was harmless. Just a few flirtatious exchanges, a few harmless comments. But one night it crossed the line. Jason had been texting me all day. I could feel the heat building between us, each word making me crave more. After dinner, when Tom went to his study, I knew it was the perfect time. I grabbed my phone, sent him a quick message, and waited. The first time we kissed was like something out of a dream. His lips were soft but demanding, pulling me into something I hadn't known I needed. I tried to stop myself, I really did. But I couldn't. The desire was too strong, too consuming. When we finally pulled apart, I knew there was no turning back. I had just crossed a line I couldn't erase, and that moment would haunt me forever. But in the moment, all I could think about was the rush of excitement, the adrenaline, and the feeling of being wanted. That night, I went back to Tom, who was already in bed, engrossed in a work email. I kissed him goodnight and went to sleep, pretending that nothing had changed. But something had changed, and I knew it. The lies had already begun. Chapter 2: The Guilt. The days after that first kiss felt like a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about Jason. His texts, his calls, the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race. I had become addicted to the attention he gave me, the way he made me feel seen in a way Tom hadn't for years. I couldn't help but feel the guilt weighing on me. Every time I looked at Tom, I saw him as the man I had once loved, the man I had promised to be faithful to. But I also saw the man I had drifted from. He was still the same, dedicated, hardworking, and kind, but there was a distance between us now. A distance that had grown over the years as we had both become more wrapped up in our own lives. I realized that the emotional disconnect had started long before Jason entered the picture, but that didn't make what I was doing any less wrong. I tried to bury the guilt deep inside. I would focus on my work, my home, and keep my thoughts occupied. But every time I was alone, I would think of him. Jason was always there, in the back of my mind, pulling me back into the fantasy world we had created between texts and stolen moments. I convinced myself that what was happening wasn't that bad, that it was just a mistake, just a little spark that didn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. After all, it wasn't like I had fallen in love with him, right? But the guilt kept eating away at me. I began to avoid Tom more and more, spending time at the office late, finding excuses to be out of the house. I didn't want to face him, didn't want to confront the reality of what I had done. Tom noticed, of course, but he was always too busy to ask any questions. His work was demanding, and I knew he was distracted by it. Still, there was a tension between us that hadn't been there before. Then, one evening it happened again. Jason sent me a message that was different from the others. It wasn't a simple flirtation. It was an invitation. He wanted to meet face to face. He wanted to take things further, and deep down I knew I wanted it too. The anticipation was almost unbearable, and before I could stop myself, I agreed. I made excuses to Tom that night, telling him I had to work late. He barely acknowledged me as I left. too lost in his emails to notice the change in my behavior. I slipped out of the house, my heart pounding as I drove to the place where Jason had told me to meet him. I couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. The guilt was still there, but it was buried under the rush of excitement that came with the idea of being with Jason again. I arrived at the bar, the dim lighting casting long shadows over the crowd. I spotted him immediately, tall, confident, waiting for me with a smile that made my stomach flip. He stood up when he saw me, his eyes scanning me with a predatory look that made my pulse race. For a moment I felt like I was the center of the universe, like I was the only one that mattered. "You came," Jason said, his voice low and smooth, a hint of surprise in his tone. "I wasn't sure you would." "I couldn't resist," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't believe how easy it was to lie, how easy it was to fall into the fantasy. He leaned in closer, brushing his lips lightly against my ear. "You look beautiful tonight," he murmured, sending a shiver down my spine. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly smothered by the rush of desire. We spent the evening talking, drinking, and laughing. Each touch, each smile, felt like a betrayal, and yet, at the same time, it felt like I was doing something I had been longing for, something I needed. Finally, the moment came when I couldn't take it anymore. The attraction, the tension, it was too much. Jason's lips were on mine before I could think, and for the second time I gave in. When it was over, I felt a wave of numbness wash over me. I looked at Jason, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath, but all I could think about was Tom. The man who I had sworn to love and cherish, the man who trusted me, the man who had no idea what I was doing. I felt dirty, caught between two worlds, one of passion and excitement, and the other of guilt and responsibility. I knew what I had done was unforgivable, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. I returned home that night to an empty house. Tom wasn't there. He had stayed at the office later than usual, and the silence in the house was deafening. I sank onto the couch, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I knew I had crossed a line, but the line had felt so blurry in the heat of the moment. And then I heard the sound of the front door opening. Tom was home. I quickly wiped my tears, trying to compose myself. He didn't notice anything amiss as he walked into the living room, his face tired but familiar. "Hey babe," he said with a small smile. "Long day." I forced a smile, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't look him in the eye. "Yeah," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm just glad it's over." But in that moment I realized something. The worst part of this whole situation wasn't the affair. It was the fact that I had already started to lose myself. Chapter 3. The Other Side. The next few days felt like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, a place where reality and guilt collided in ways I couldn't control. I went through the motions of my day, but everything felt numb, hollow. I tried to act normal, to act like the woman who loved her husband, but every time I looked at Tom, all I saw was the lie I had built between us. He was so unaware, so trusting, and it made the weight of my actions feel even heavier. Tom had always been kind to me. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but he had tried. He worked hard to provide for us, to make sure I had everything I needed, and when he was home, he always made an effort to spend time with me. But somewhere along the way I had drifted. The years had passed, and the spark between us had faded. The quiet dinners, the nights watching TV, the empty words exchanged before bed. It was all so routine, but even with that he had always been there for me. And now I was here, with a part of myself I couldn't even recognize anymore. Every time I saw Tom, I remembered Jason's lips on mine, his hands, his words. I could still taste the forbidden thrill that came with sneaking away from my responsibilities, from my vows. I had told myself it was just a mistake, just something that happened because of how distant we had become. But the longer I told myself that, the more I realized how much I had started to believe it. I began to feel a twinge of resentment toward Tom. How could he be so unaware of how much I was changing? How could he not see the pain I was silently carrying? It wasn't fair to him, but I couldn't stop the thoughts. There were moments when I even blamed him, even though I knew deep down it wasn't his fault. I couldn't help but wish that he had noticed me more, that he had seen me as more than just a wife and mother. One night I went out with Jason again. This time I didn't bother hiding it. I didn't even feel guilty when I walked out of the house, my heart pounding with excitement instead of shame. I needed this, I convinced myself. I deserved it. Tom would never understand, and maybe, deep down, I didn't want him to. The meeting was almost routine by now. Drinks, laughter, and then the inevitable, the burning need to be close to him, to feel something other than the emptiness inside me. Jason was all too willing to give me what I wanted, to sweep me away from the life that had started to suffocate me. But as we left the bar that night, something was different. Jason took my hand, his grip firm but tender. "We need to talk," he said, his voice quieter than usual, his eyes intense. For a moment, I didn't know what to expect. Had he figured it out? Was he going to say what I didn't want to hear? About what? I asked, my voice betraying me. I knew exactly what this was about. It was about the mess I was creating, about how tangled everything had become. "I don't want to keep being the other man," Jason said, his words cutting through the fog of desire. "I'm not some side piece, Lena. I need to know where this is going. I can't keep doing this to myself." The words hit me harder than I had expected. The reality of the situation, the consequences of my actions, suddenly came rushing back in a wave of coldness. Jason wasn't just some flirtation anymore. He was a person, someone who had invested in this affair, someone who had feelings. And I had been playing with fire. "I don't know what you mean," I said, my throat tightening. I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't prepared for him to question the affair, for him to ask about what I really wanted. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm saying that I can't keep doing this if it's just about you escaping your life. You need to decide, Lena. You can't keep pretending like everything's okay." The words cut deeper than I anticipated. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was the realization that I had been using him to fill the void I felt, using him to escape the emptiness I didn't want to face. And now he was asking me to choose. I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to face the fact that I was hurting two people. Tom, who was still clueless, and Jason, who I had once believed I could have a future with. I didn't want to make a decision. I didn't want to be the one to decide which man I wanted. I don't know what I want," I whispered, the words escaping me before I could stop them. "I don't know if I can choose." Jason stepped closer to me, his face softening, but there was an edge to his expression. "Then I guess this is where we end," he said, his voice low. "I'm not going to be your secret anymore. If you can't make a decision, I'm out." I stood there, frozen in place, watching him walk away. The finality of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. And just like that, I was alone again. The man who had given me excitement and escape was gone. The man who loved me, who had no idea what I had done, was waiting at home, completely oblivious. For the first time I felt the full weight of what I had done. I had lost something real, something tangible, and I was left standing in the middle of it all, alone with the wreckage I had created. Chapter 4. The consequences. The days that followed Jason's departure felt like a heavy silence had descended on my life. I couldn't escape the feeling of emptiness that clung to me. Every time I walked into the house, the quietness was suffocating. Tom was there, of course, but it felt like he was a stranger to me now. I had built walls between us, and they were growing taller with each passing day. I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. I had made a mistake, yes, but it was over now. I could focus on my marriage, focus on Tom. I had told myself that I would never see Jason again, that I was done with the lies. But I was lying to myself. The guilt was unbearable, but the longing for Jason was still there, like an insidious shadow, following me everywhere I went. I began to avoid Tom more, using work as an excuse to stay out late. I couldn't bear to face him, couldn't bear the thought of pretending like everything was okay when I knew deep down it wasn't. He could sense the distance between us, but he didn't say anything. He didn't want to confront the truth, just like I didn't. One night I came home late, my eyes swollen from crying. The weight of everything I had done hit me all at once, and I didn't know how to carry it anymore. I opened the door to find Tom sitting in the living room, waiting for me. There was a look in his eyes, something I hadn't seen before. He wasn't angry, not yet. But I could tell that he knew. "I think we need to talk," Tom said, his voice calm but firm. He was sitting on the couch, his posture rigid. It was like he had been waiting for this moment, preparing himself for the inevitable. My heart started to race. I couldn't breathe. This was it. This was the moment everything was going to come crashing down. I had hoped that somehow I could keep up the facade for a little longer, but I knew deep down that I couldn't. "About what?" I asked, my voice trembling. I tried to keep it steady, tried to act like everything was normal. But there was no fooling him. Not anymore. "About you," he said simply. "About everything that's been happening." I swallowed hard, panic rising in my chest. "What do you mean?" Tom didn't answer right away. He just looked at me as if searching for the right words. His eyes were sad, but there was a glint of something else there too. Anger, maybe? Or disappointment? I couldn't tell. "I know," he said quietly. "I know about you and Jason." The air in the room felt like it had been sucked out. My stomach dropped. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. How did he know? How long had he known? "Tom, Don't," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I know everything." My mind raced, trying to piece together how this had all come to light. Had Jason told him? Had he somehow found out about the affair on his own? But it didn't matter. The truth was out, and nothing would be the same again. Tom stood up, pacing the room as he spoke. "You've been lying to me for months. I thought we were fine. I thought everything was going well, but clearly I was wrong. I didn't see it. I didn't see the distance between us until it was too late." His words hit me like a slap in the face. I wanted to defend myself, to explain why I did what I did, but I couldn't. There was no excuse. There was nothing I could say to make it right. "Why?" Tom asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Why would you do this to me? To us?" I felt the tears welling up in my eyes. I didn't have an answer. I didn't even know why I had done it. I had been searching for something I couldn't even name, and Jason had offered me a temporary escape. But it hadn't solved anything. It had only created a mess that I couldn't undo. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Tom didn't respond right away. He just stood there, staring at me as if trying to comprehend what I had done. The silence between us was suffocating. Finally he spoke again, his voice low and steady. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Lena. I don't know if I can look at you the same way again." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I knew I had destroyed something beautiful, something I could never get back. I had betrayed him in the worst way. And now I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken marriage. Tom walked past me, heading for the door. I didn't stop him. I knew he needed space, time to process what had happened. I stayed in the living room, alone, the weight of my actions settling on me like a heavy cloak. I had never felt so lost. Chapter 5: The Breaking Point. The days that followed were a blur of silence and unanswered questions. Tom had left the house after our confrontation that night, and I didn't hear from him for what felt like an eternity. He didn't return my calls or texts. Every time I looked at his empty side of the bed, my heart ached, but I knew I had done this to myself. There was no running from the consequences of my actions. The guilt gnawed at me, sharp and unrelenting. I kept replaying that night in my head. The look in Tom's eyes when he told me he knew about the affair, the betrayal written on his face. I couldn't escape it. But I wasn't the only one suffering. Tom was the one who had been blindsided, the one who had trusted me, and I had torn that trust apart with my selfishness. I tried to focus on my work, tried to bury myself in something other than the devastation that was slowly consuming me. But it was impossible. The thought of Tom, of his hurt, kept circling in my mind. I missed him despite everything. I missed the man I had married, the one who had held my hand through everything, even when things were difficult. But now I had to face the truth. I had abandoned him long before Jason entered the picture. The distance had been growing between us for months, maybe even years, and the affair had just been the breaking point. That afternoon my phone buzzed. It was a message from Tom. I almost didn't want to open it, afraid of what it might say. But my hand moved on its own accord, and I clicked on the message. "Tom, I'm coming over tonight. We need to talk." The words hit me like a wave. The calm, controlled tone of his message made my heart race. He was coming back. But what would happen next? What would he say? I tried to prepare myself, but nothing could prepare me for the moment he walked back through the door. I hadn't seen him in almost a week, and though I had spent most of the days crying and begging for forgiveness, I knew that this moment could change everything. That evening the doorbell rang and my heart skipped a beat. I opened the door to find Tom standing there. His expression unreadable. His face had aged in the past week. There were lines of stress and exhaustion around his eyes, but there was something else there too. Something cold. "Lena," he said quietly, his voice flat, his gaze distant. "We need to talk about what happens next." I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. My hands were shaking, but I didn't let it show. I knew this conversation was inevitable, but I wasn't ready for what was about to come. We sat down on the couch, an uncomfortable distance between us. Tom didn't look at me, instead staring at the floor as if it held the answers to everything. "You know, I've been thinking a lot," he started, his voice low. "About everything. About you, about us." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "And I've come to a conclusion." I braced myself. I had no idea what he was going to say, but I felt like I was on the edge of something I couldn't control. "I think," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I think we're done. I can't forgive you for this, Lena. I can't just forget what you did. What you took from me." I felt my stomach drop, the words hitting me harder than I expected. I had always known deep down that there was a possibility he wouldn't forgive me, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel real, like it was finally over. "Tom," I started, my voice breaking. "Please don't say that. I know what I did was horrible, but I'm sorry. I've been so lost. I wasn't thinking. I never wanted to hurt you." He looked at me then, his gaze piercing and cold. "It's not just the affair, Lena. It's the fact that you lied. That you let me love you, trust you, and you turned around and betrayed me in the worst possible way. I gave you everything, and you threw it all away for something that wasn't even real." The weight of his words crushed me. I had taken everything for granted, thinking that I could have it all without consequence. But I had lost him, and now I was left with nothing. "I never wanted it to go this far," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I never wanted to hurt you. But I was so empty, Tom. I didn't know how to fix it, so I made a stupid choice." His eyes softened for a brief moment, but only for a second. "I don't know if there's anything left to fix. Maybe there never was. I'm not the person you need anymore, Lena. You've changed, and I don't know if I can ever trust you again." I felt like the air had been sucked from my lungs. This was it. The final nail in the coffin. Tom had made up his mind, and no matter how much I begged or cried, it wouldn't change anything. "I'm sorry," I said again, my voice barely a whisper. "I really am." But the words felt hollow, empty, just like the person I had become. I had thrown away the one thing that had once mattered most to me. And now, as I looked at Tom's face, once filled with love and hope, now filled with hurt and bitterness, I realized that I had lost him for good. Tom stood up, running a hand through his hair as if trying to regain some composure. "I need some space, Lena. I think it's time for me to move out. We need time apart so I can figure things out." He turned away, heading toward the door, but paused before leaving. "Goodbye, Lena. Maybe someday you'll understand what you've done." The door shut quietly behind him, and I was left standing there, broken, in the ruins of everything I had destroyed. Chapter 6. The Cold Void. The silence in the house was deafening. It was the kind of silence that creeps into your bones and settles there, making everything feel like it's been drained of color, drained of life. Tom had left. I couldn't believe it, but the absence of him, his footsteps, his voice, was already so painfully real. It felt like I had lost him for good, and this time there was no going back. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the empty space where we had sat just hours ago. The weight of his words echoed in my mind, replaying over and over like a broken record. Maybe someday you'll understand what you've done. The guilt was unbearable. I had pushed him away, destroyed something that could have been salvaged. But the reality was, I didn't think there was anything left to fix. I didn't know how long I stood there, frozen, unable to move. Eventually, I walked to the kitchen, almost mechanically, opening the fridge and staring at the empty shelves. Tom's favorite coffee creamer, his lunch leftovers, the things that once made this house feel like home were gone, replaced by an uncomfortable emptiness. The house felt foreign, like it was no longer mine. I couldn't shake the thoughts of what I had done. I had been so reckless, so selfish. The affair with Jason had started innocently enough, a way to feel wanted again, to feel something that wasn't routine or mundane. But in the process, I had destroyed everything that had ever mattered. And now, with Tom gone, I was left with nothing. The phone in my pocket buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. I fumbled for it, not sure who would be reaching out. My heart skipped when I saw the message. It was from Jason. Jason, I've been thinking about you a lot. How are you holding up? I stared at the screen, torn. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend that everything wasn't spiraling out of control, but another part of me couldn't resist. I wanted to feel the comfort of his words, to feel the safety of his embrace. But was that what I needed? Did I really need him back, or was it just that I couldn't stand the idea of being truly alone? I didn't know how much longer I could pretend to have everything under control. The woman I was pretending to be, strong, unaffected, was crumbling beneath the weight of my own choices. I replied, my fingers trembling as I typed the words. I'm not okay. Everything's falling apart. I don't know what to do anymore. Almost immediately, he replied. Jason, I told you I'd be here, Lena. We can talk, we can figure this out. You don't have to do this alone. I stared at the words, the hollow comfort of his offer sinking in. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he could make everything better, but I knew better. Jason wasn't the answer. He had never been the answer. But somehow, in the midst of all the chaos, I found myself wanting to believe in him, wanting to hold on to something that gave me hope. The truth, though, was that I was only running from my own mess. I wasn't thinking about what Tom was going through, or what I had taken from him. I wasn't thinking about the wreckage I had left in my wake. And now, I was considering turning to Jason again, as a way to escape the consequences of my actions. But that would only make things worse, wouldn't it? I slammed the phone down on the counter, the anger boiling up inside me. How had I become this person? How had I let it all spiral out of control? A knock at the door interrupted my spiraling thoughts, and I froze. Who could it be? I hadn't expected anyone, but there it was again. Another knock, this time louder, more insistent. I slowly made my way to the door, dread swirling in my stomach. When I opened it, I was met with an unexpected sight. Standing on the porch was Tom, his face drawn, his posture rigid. He looked different now. His eyes dark with emotion, something deeper than anger, almost grief. Tom, I whispered, unsure of what to say, unsure of what was happening. He didn't speak right away. He just stood there, looking at me as if he was trying to piece together what had happened to us. Finally, he broke the silence. I came to get my things, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I'm not here to fight. I just need to get out of here. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in, though every part of me wanted to stop him, to beg him to stay, to fix everything. But I knew it was too late. He had already made up his mind. He walked past me, heading for the bedroom where we had once shared a life. I stood there, frozen, unable to move, as he started gathering his things. Clothes, his toiletries, anything he could carry. I wanted to say something, anything to make him stop, but I couldn't. The finality of it all was overwhelming. "I don't know how it came to this," Tom muttered under his breath as he packed his bag. "I don't know how I didn't see it." I closed my eyes, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. "I don't know either," I thought, but I couldn't say it out loud. When he finished, he stood by the door, the bag in his hand, and turned to face me one last time. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Lena. Really do. But I can't be the one to help you anymore." The door closed behind him with a soft click. And that was it. I was alone. Chapter 7. The Cold Aftermath. The next few days blurred into one another. I had no idea what time it was or what day it was. My life had become a twisted version of everything I once knew, and I couldn't find the strength to pull myself out of it. Tom was gone, and now, more than ever, I felt like a stranger in my own life. The house was too quiet. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and I wasn't sure if I even wanted to fight the suffocating air anymore. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work, hoping that if I just kept my mind occupied, I wouldn't feel the weight of the devastation that I had caused. But it was impossible. Every time I sat at my desk, all I could think about was Tom. I couldn't help but wonder where he was, if he was okay, if he was moving on. He deserved so much better than this. Better than me. I would have given anything to turn back time, to take back the affair, to undo the damage I had done. But time doesn't work like that. Once you make a decision, you have to live with the consequences. And I was living with them now. One night, I sat in the living room, alone in the dark. The house felt cavernous, empty, the way it never had before. I had tried to call Tom a few times after he left, but he wouldn't answer. I had sent text messages, emails, trying to explain myself, to tell him how sorry I was, but I hadn't heard a word back. And that was how I knew, how I truly knew that it was over. I had lost him. There was no way to fix it. And as I sat there in the dark, staring at the cold, empty space where we used to sit together, I realized that I couldn't fix anything. I had already broken it beyond repair. A text buzzed on my phone, pulling me from my thoughts. My heart skipped a beat when I saw who it was from. Jason, I've been thinking. You don't have to go through this alone, you know. I'm here for you. I almost didn't want to open it. Every time I heard from Jason, it felt like I was being pulled deeper into the mess I had created. But something inside me, something weak and desperate, urged me to reply. Me. I don't know what to do anymore, Jason. Feel so lost. Jason's response came almost immediately. Jason, I get it. Really do. I've been thinking about us a lot lately, and I know things didn't end the way we wanted, but I still care about you. I always will. The words made my chest ache. I didn't want to admit it, but I still cared about him too. I had been lying to myself, telling myself that I could forget about him, that I could move on and try to fix my marriage. But the truth was, Jason had given me something that Tom hadn't been able to. And I had let that something destroy everything that had once been good in my life. I miss you, Jason. I don't know what to do. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What was I doing? Was I really about to invite him back into my life, back into the mess I had made? I wanted to make it all go away. I wanted to fix things, but I didn't know how. So instead, I reached out to Jason, knowing that this would only bring more pain. Jason, I'm here. We'll figure this out together. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Jason wasn't the answer. Neither was the affair, or any of the choices I had made. The only thing I was doing was running from the reality of my situation. Running from the truth. I put my phone down and rested my face in my hands, feeling the tears come again. What had I become? How had I let everything slip through my fingers so easily? The truth was, I wasn't ready to face the consequences. I wasn't ready to look at myself in the mirror and accept the person I had turned into. The woman who had thrown everything away for a fleeting moment of escape. But no matter how much I tried to avoid it, the truth was there. It was always there waiting for me. And eventually I would have to face it. But not tonight. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. The next few weeks were a blur of numbness, self-loathing, and half-hearted attempts to put my life back together. I had stopped trying to reach out to Tom, knowing that any contact would only make things worse. He had made it clear he didn't want to hear from me. And as much as it hurt, I knew I had no right to demand anything from him anymore. I buried myself in work, hoping that the constant tasks, deadlines, and the endless list of responsibilities would block out the pain. But the silence in the house was unbearable. There was no Tom, no laughter, no shared glances. The once warm walls that had been filled with memories now felt like a tomb. At night, the loneliness was the worst. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I'd imagine Tom beside me. I'd think about the way his body felt against mine, the way his hand would wrap around mine when he pulled me in for a hug. The warmth of his presence was a constant reminder of everything I had lost. I wondered if he thought of me too, or if he had already moved on. But I couldn't focus on that right now. I had to keep moving, one step at a time, one breath at a time. But there was a strange emptiness inside me, and no matter how hard I tried, nothing seemed to fill it. Not even the texts from Jason, not even the vague promises of comfort he tried to offer. I knew deep down that this wasn't the solution. Running back to him wouldn't solve anything. But when the loneliness was this deafening, it was hard to resist the temptation of familiar comfort. One evening, after yet another exhausting day at work, I sat down on the couch and checked my phone. Jason had messaged me again. His name flashed on the screen like an invitation to escape. "Jason, I miss you, Lena. Come over tonight. We need to talk." I hesitated. It had been a few weeks since we'd last spoken. I had been so consumed with guilt over what I'd done to Tom that I hadn't had the chance to think about Jason's role in all of this. It was a dangerous game, one I was already too far in to escape from. I sat there for a moment, the phone warm in my hand, staring at his words. A part of me wanted to say no, to close the door on the past and start over. But the loneliness gnawed at me. I missed the feeling of being wanted, of being desired. And in that moment, the thought of seeing Jason again, the man who had offered me something different, something exciting, was too tempting to resist. I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. "Me, okay. I'll be there in an hour." As soon as I hit send, a sense of dread washed over me. I wasn't doing this for the right reasons. I was doing it because I couldn't stand the quiet, the ache of missing something that was no longer there. I dressed quickly, not bothering to think about what this would mean for my future or for Tom. The thought of Tom barely crossed my mind anymore. I was too far gone, wrapped up in the chaos I had created. When I arrived at Jason's apartment, the door opened almost immediately. He greeted me with a smile that was equal parts warmth and possessiveness, his eyes lighting up as if seeing me was the only thing that mattered. He pulled me into an embrace, and for a moment I allowed myself to melt into it, to feel the comfort of his touch. "I've missed you," Jason whispered in my ear, his lips brushing against my skin. I felt the pang of guilt deep inside me, but I pushed it aside, desperate to feel something, anything, other than the aching void that had become my life. We sat on his couch, talking in soft voices, catching up on all the little things that had happened since we last saw each other. But deep down, I knew that this was only a temporary distraction. I wasn't fixing anything. I was just prolonging the inevitable. And as I sat there with Jason, laughing and talking like everything was fine, I couldn't shake the thought that this was all a lie. I had been living in a bubble, pretending that I could escape my mistakes. But in the back of my mind, I knew that the truth would always catch up with me, just like it had with Tom. Chapter 9. The Breaking Point. It had been a few days since I visited Jason, but the unease lingered. Every time I thought about what had happened, my stomach churned with guilt. For a moment, I thought seeing him would help me feel better, help me forget the hurt I had caused. But it didn't. Instead, it only made everything worse. It was like trying to put a band-aid on a wound that needed stitches. Nothing was healing. It was just getting messier. As I walked around the house, the reality of what I had done to Tom settled in once again. I had tried to convince myself that I could have it all, that I could get away with it, that I could salvage what was left of my life and keep running from the consequences. But the lies were starting to catch up with me. I could feel it in every corner of the house, in every empty room. The silence was suffocating, like the walls themselves were closing in on me. I hadn't heard from Tom in days, not even a text. Part of me wanted to reach out to apologize, to fix what had been broken, but I knew deep down that it was too late. Tom had left me for a reason. I had made him feel worthless, insignificant. I had made him believe that I didn't care about him, that he wasn't enough. And now there was no undoing that. The phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me from my thoughts. I picked it up, heart pounding in my chest. It was a message from Jason again. Jason, I've been thinking. Miss us, don't you? I swallowed hard. Course I missed him. I missed the comfort he gave me, the way he made me feel like I was wanted. But the truth was, that's all it was. Comfort. Temporary escape. It wasn't real. Jason wasn't the one I was supposed to be with. I had thrown away everything with Tom, and for what? A few stolen moments of attention from someone who could never replace what I had lost. But despite knowing that, I couldn't help myself. I responded, my fingers shaking as I typed out the words. Me, I miss you too, but I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can keep living like this. Jason replied almost immediately. Jason, you don't have to keep living like this, Lena. You don't have to be alone. Come over tonight. Let's talk. We'll figure this out together. I stared at the screen, fighting the battle between guilt and desire. What was I doing? Why couldn't I just stop? I knew I was only making things worse for myself, for everyone involved, but I couldn't stop the need to feel needed, to feel wanted. I needed to be held together again. I needed to forget. As the night wore on, I found myself getting ready, dressing in the clothes I knew Jason liked. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. The woman who had lost herself in lies and deceit. The woman who had ruined everything that was once beautiful in her life. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop the desperate need to escape. When I arrived at Jason's apartment, he was waiting for me. He didn't even let me knock before he opened the door and pulled me inside. The instant the door closed behind me, the tension between us thickened. There was no denying it. There was an attraction, an unspoken pull that neither of us could resist. But as Jason leaned in to kiss me, something inside me snapped. For the first time I pulled away. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that I was okay with everything falling apart. Couldn't keep running. I can't keep doing this, Jason, I whispered, my voice trembling. I don't want to hurt anyone anymore. Jason looked at me with confusion, his brow furrowed. What are you talking about, Lena? You came here because you wanted this. I wanted it because I was lonely, I said, tears welling in my eyes. I was running from the mess I've made. I thought I could fix it, but I can't. I'm just making everything worse. Jason's expression shifted, his frustration beginning to show. So you think this is all my fault? You're the one who reached out to me. No, Jason, I said, shaking my head. I'm not blaming you. I'm blaming myself. I'm the one who destroyed everything. I'm the one who destroyed us. And I can't keep doing this. I backed away, my chest tightening with each breath. I have to fix what I broke. Have to go back to Tom. I need to fix my marriage, or at least try to. Jason's face went pale. So that's it. You're choosing him over me. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned and walked toward the door. I knew Jason was calling after me, but I couldn't stop now. I had already taken too much from everyone in my life. It was time to face the consequences, to own up to my mistakes. When I got home, I sat on the couch, my hands trembling. I didn't know where Tom was or if he would even want to talk to me. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep running. I had to face the wreckage I had caused. I had to try to make things right. For the first time in weeks, I picked up the phone and dialed his number. My heart pounded as it rang, but I wasn't sure what to expect. The line clicked. "Hello." Tom's voice, distant and cold, made my heart drop. "Tom," I whispered, choking on the words. "Can we talk?" Chapter 10. The final confrontation. The phone call felt like a lifeline, but also like a noose around my neck. Every second that passed between the ringing and Tom finally answering felt like an eternity. When I heard his voice on the other end, it sent a jolt through me. It was the voice I had once known so well, the voice that had soothed me on sleepless nights and filled our home with warmth. But now it was different. Distant, cautious, guarded. "Hello." His voice was flat, emotionless. I couldn't blame him. After everything, I wouldn't expect anything else. "Tom," I breathed, my voice cracking under the weight of the words I wasn't sure I was ready to say. "Can we talk? Please?" There was a long pause, and I could practically hear him weighing his options. Part of me expected him to hang up right then and there, to say the words that I feared the most, that it was too late. But he didn't. He sighed, a sound filled with resignation, and finally responded. "I don't know what there is to talk about, Lena. You made your choice." His words hit me like a physical blow. They stung sharp and real. I had made my choice. But now, standing in the wreckage of my decisions, I regretted everything. I regretted betraying him, deceiving him, tearing apart everything we had built together. And I hated myself for it. "I know I've ruined everything," I said, my voice trembling. "But please, Tom, let me explain. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I wasn't thinking, and now I see the damage I've done. Please, I can't lose you. I don't know what to do without you." There was another long pause. I held my breath, waiting for him to respond. When he did, it was quieter, almost softer, but there was still that unmistakable edge of hurt in his voice. "You've already lost me, Lena. You had me, and you threw it all away for someone else. And now, after everything, you want me to believe you're sorry." His words sliced through me. He was right. I had broken his trust, his heart. And no matter how much I apologized, no matter how many tears I shed, the reality was that nothing could erase what I had done. "I know," I whispered, the guilt suffocating me. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I need you to know that I'm sorry. I was weak. I was selfish, and I never should have done what I did. I see that now." Tom's silence on the other end of the line was suffocating. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Loud, deafening, and full of things that were left unsaid. I wanted to fill the silence with more words, with more apologies, but I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. "Why did you call me?" His voice broke the silence, sharp and raw. I don't know," I said, my chest tightening. "I guess I thought I could fix it. That maybe, if I just told you how much I regret everything, you'd come back and we could try again. But I know that's not realistic." "You're right," he said, his voice low. "You can't fix it. Not this time." My heart shattered at his words. I had always known that it might come to this, but I had hoped, deep down, that we could find a way back to each other. But now, hearing him say that, I realized just how far we had fallen apart. The space between us was vast, and there was no bridge that could cross it. "I don't want to lose you, Tom," I whispered, my throat thick with emotion. "But I understand if you don't want me anymore. I've ruined everything. I've lost you. You haven't just lost me, Lena. You've lost yourself," he said. His voice colder now, the bitterness creeping in. And I think that's the hardest part of all. The finality in his words hit me like a ton of bricks. There was no going back. I had burned every bridge, and now I was standing on the edge, looking down into the chasm of the life I had destroyed. "I never meant to hurt you, Tom. I swear," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." There was no response. I waited, but the silence stretched on, and eventually, I realized that the conversation was over. Tom wasn't coming back. Not this time. I'll always love you, I whispered, my words a final plea. But there was no answer. The line went dead, and I was left alone in the silence. I sat on the floor, the weight of everything I had lost crushing me. The tears came then, unbidden, as I realized that I had lost the most important person in my life, not just because of my affair, but because of everything I had neglected, every lie I had told. Tom had given me everything, and I had thrown it all away. I had destroyed us. And now, there was no way to rebuild what I had broken. I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. End.